say some things, do some thinking about just watching these different things on higher dimensions and these alternative ideas and theories about how human society originated and evolution and spiritual theories of humanity and the origins of humanity versus scientific theories and what have you. And there's this big debate about whether or not human beings evolved from animals or whether or not we were seeded by extraterrestrial or higher beings, or whether or not we were created by God. And there's all these competing theories. And from the scientific perspective, there's no competition, because what the spiritual folks and the intuitives count as realities, there's no evidence for that. And for the spiritual people, they feel that, I feel that these other theories about human origins are older than the scientific theories, and that the scientific theories change rather rapidly in the course of decades or centuries. Water. And therefore that the spiritual theories have a longer endurance and are more true, and also that they speak more to our innate sense of dignity and our innate knowing about where we come from. So if you're more spiritually and intuitively inclined, then you tend to go towards the spiritual theories or the religious theories. And if you're more sensory based, then you tend to go towards the scientific theories. And my thing is that I feel that we've been in these philosophical arguments about things for centuries, and sometimes they're important, but I think this has become a habit that we got to grow beyond. And so we can see things as opposed to each other, or we can try to synthesize things. And I think when you try to synthesize these perspectives that human beings evolved, or not evolved, but originated as an archetype or as a blueprint on the higher planes, and then we were seeded onto the physical world, like, that theory is not inherently incompatible with the theory of evolution. You know what I'm saying? As proposed by current science. It's like, see, I think something that we do sometimes is we use the reasoning of the third dimension to try to think about the fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh and higher dimensions, right? So we think that extraterrestrials have to be physical entities, and we think that something that we're seeing in the imaginative and the intuitive is actually tangibly real in the literal sense, you know? And that's like when you look at the language of dreams and symbols and the way that the imagination and the unconscious mind work. The unconscious mind will use whatever it can to make a picture of something that it's an approximation of what it is experiencing and what it's trying to communicate to you. So like if I said a train of horses with wings as a translation for an airplane, you know what I'm saying? Like, it isn't exactly, just because you see a train of horses doesn't mean there's going to be a train of horses in 3 dimensions that takes off 100 people. On the other hand, I think one of the things that we do is we translate things that are in the archetypal dimensions into 2 dimensions. So you could have a spiritual entity that could carry a bunch of people, and then in our 3-dimensional translation, we translate that as an airplane. What I'm saying is that the laws between the lower and the higher, the above and the below, they are analogous to one another, but they have to be translated. There's a twist, okay? There's a twist as you change scales, you know what I mean? Anyway, this is what I think. There's a twist as you change scales, and that twist contains a lot of illusion. And if I take a rubber band, you could do this yourself. Take a rubber band and then expand a circle and then twist the circle. It looks like it's 2 separate rubber bands, but it's really just one rubber band, right? And I think that is what happens with the dimensions, is there's like a twist that go up them. And so you think that you're seeing things as 2 distinct things, or you're seeing things inverted, but you kind of have to like untwist it. You got to twist it and then you got to untwist it. People were like, what is he talking about? So, I think it's possible that the human being as an archetypal entity, as a blueprint, as an etheric structure, as an astral spirit, as a mental impulse, as a spiritual will, lives in the higher dimensions, and has lived for eons in the higher dimensions, or lives beyond time. And I think as you get closer to the third dimension, you deal with shorter and shorter spans of time, and as you come out from the third dimension, you deal with longer and longer spans of time until you reach planes where there's actually no time. So we're taking and we're translating between levels. And so I think it's possible that the archetype of humanity, or man, or whatever people want to call it, or mind, the Son of God, the child of God archetype exists in its own realm. But that child of God archetype, as it moved into the lower dimensions, reached into the lower dimensions to basically sculpt a body that would be appropriate for it. And it could be something that happens instantaneously up there. It takes ages to happen down here, and vice versa, And so in sculpting, it called forth the animal bodies and the appropriate animal bodies in the appropriate form, so that it could then drop down and inhabit the animal body, and then the archetype of humanity or man could move around this dimension or move around the earth. And so instead of seeing them as two separate things, you could see them as analogous. You know what I'm saying? Like, if I take a glass and I hold it in the sun and it reflects a shadow on the ground, and I move the shadow can do certain things that the glass isn't going to do. You know what I'm saying? Like, two shadows can pass over each other and interpenetrate each other, but two glasses can't. So some things in the higher dimensions and the lower dimensions, they don't act exactly the same way, but what's happening in the lower dimension is patterned off of what's happening in the higher dimension, and causative. At least that's the old thinking. I tend to think it's actually more of a loop thing, because if it wasn't, then why would the higher dimensions want to come down here anyway? And we've explained a lot of that through theories like the fall and whatnot, but I think that all the dimensions are connected to each other, and they learning from each other, and so the higher is learning from the lower, just as the lower is learning from the higher. So instead of always seeing things in contradiction and saying this theory or that one, and mine's right or this one, if we try to see things in terms of synthesis, sometimes I think you get a fuller picture and a multi-sided picture. And if you have this one thing over here and this one thing over here, and you try to synthesize them, both of them get shifted and changed a little bit, but I think potentially both of them get filled out. And so I feel like science, myth, spirituality, religion, I think they can complement one another. I don't think they always have to be in this place of contradicting and trying to say this one's right and this one's true and this one's false and this one's not. I think we ought to look for the places where there's bridge and synthesis. I was having another train of thoughts too that might seem kind of abstract. But I was thinking a lot about the political times. And some people think politics is a distraction from spirituality. Some people think spirituality is a distraction from politics. And again, I'm trying to chart the middle path. And I feel like what are world events but the working out of the spirit? What are world events but the collective consciousness of humanity trying to find itself in right relationship to itself and to the earth and to God? Right? And we're in this time now. It has a lot of different names, and this is again one of these things we can argue about which name. And some names, some ways of saying it, it's from this culture, it's from this society, and if that's more to you, cool. But I don't think we need to argue about it. But some people call it Revelations. Some people call it the Age of Aquarius. Some people call it the sixth sun. Some people call it the Great Turning. Some people, there's all kinds of names for it. The shift from the Kali to the Tetra Yuga. There's all kinds of, some people call it revolution. You know, some people call collective liberation. There's all kinds of names, there's all kinds of angles for it. But I think there's a knowledge that's happening. Some people call it singularity. But there's a knowledge that we are about to, or in the midst of, a fundamental transformation of how we experience life on the planet Earth, how we experience humanity, how we experience flesh, how we experience our senses, how we experience mind, how we experience relationship. We're in the middle of a total shift of all that stuff. And everybody knows it in their gut one way or the other, and there's different responses and reactions to it. I'm gonna come back on this on part 2.